Can you communicate with the dead? This is what we'd like to find out as we listen back. Can you communicate with the dead? Jeff wanted to find out, which is why he brought a Ouija board to the old cemetery. He came alone, but then Jeff did most everything alone. Most people who were acquainted with Jeff thought he was a little strange, weird, peculiar. After all, most people aren't obsessed with witchcraft, demonology, and the occult. At least, not past high school. The old cemetery closed officially at 8 p.m., but the main gate stayed open all night. It was still dark at 8 p.m. these chilly April evenings, so Jeff reckoned he wouldn't be disturbed. He set the board up in a dark corner, not far from the potter's field, where they buried all the murderers hung in the old jail. Fortunately, the ground was fairly dry, even though there were still patches of snow on the ground. The night was also very still, so he was able to easily light the black candles he brought specially for the occasion. Still, Jeff thought he could hear the wind in the trees that covered the cemetery ground. Anyway, he could hear a weird moaning sound in the distance, which must have been the wind. What else could it have been? Jeff began by asking that boring old question they always ask. Is there anyone there? Of course, the planchette moved automatically to yes. Who are you? Jeff said into the darkness. The planchette swung back and forth and slowly spelled out H-E-I-P-E-L. Hypel? Wasn't there a condemned man named Hypel who was buried in Potter's Field? Jeff wasn't exactly sure how to proceed at this point, so he covered by asking, Are you dead? Duh, Jeff thought, but he couldn't think of anything better. He was starting to feel the cold, too, icy chills running up and down his spine. Was it the night air, or the presence of spirits, he wondered. But instead of moving to yes, the planchette began to spell out R-U-N. Run. Why should I run? Jeff said stupidly to the board and to the night. But Ouija declined to answer. Jeff thought he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. Instinctively, he turned to look in the direction of Potter's Field, in case the dead were rising from their unmarked graves. He saw nothing. Nothing. But when he turned back to his Ouija board, the heads were there. Just heads. Just heads floating, hovering in the air above some of the nearby gravestones. Evil-looking, satanic heads, both male and female, with dark, pinched faces, greasy, unkempt hair, and eyes which flashed red in the obscurity of the night. Jeff was up and running, forgetting both the Ouija board and his black candles, which were found by alarmed cemetery workers early the next morning. Jeff was parked at the other end of the property, not far from the entrance gate, a fact he was now roundly cursing. What had he called up out of hell? Demons? Elementals? He made a beeline for the car, running over the old graves, and once, when he cast a quick glance over his shoulder, colliding with a large monument dedicated to someone who had died in 1936. But the heads were floating right behind him. He had to keep running faster. He was about halfway to his vehicle when he came across the bodies. The headless bodies. They lay atop the graves in dead grass, 7 or 8 of them, male and female, in various stages of undress, some even naked in spite of the cold. Jeff ran through them screaming, and as he did, they rose up and began to shamble after him, arms outstretched and moving without heads, moving without their heads. Were the dead leaving their graves? No. Unfortunately for him, Jeff had stumbled into a coven of night floaters. What are the night floaters? Floating heads, aka night floaters or floaters, are an anomalous phenomena reported from various places in Canada and throughout North America. The name refers to the ability of certain individuals to detach their heads from the trunks of their bodies, the heads then being able to fly or float at will. They are said to attack unsuspecting victims, biting them and sometimes even killing them. They make a moaning sound while at a distance, which fades to silence as the heads approach, and they have the ability to animate their headless bodies in order to pursue and attack victims. Jeff had never heard of the night floaters and didn't know what was after him. All he knew was that he wanted to get away. He kept fingering his key fob as he ran, so the car was unlocked as he dived in. Jeff locked the doors as the heads surrounded the vehicle and leered through the glass at him. Both male and female, they were universally ugly, their skin disfigured by acne, and they were dirty looking. A headless female, who appeared to be wearing only panties, tried to yank his car door open, so Jeff sped out of there like a bat out of hell. The heads floated after him for a block or two before giving up and returning to the cemetery. The night floaters don't like calling attention to themselves, and besides, they wanted to go back and eat bugs. Like most flying things, they liked to eat bugs, and the bugs were especially good tonight. Bugs. Jeff drove to work and parked in the huge, well-lit parking lot. He worked the graveyard shift. No pun intended. The graveyard shift in a big box supermarket. He was way early. It was only 9 o'clock, but he figured he was home safe. But Jeff was wrong. For while the night floaters had let him go, something had in fact followed him from the cemetery. Something evil. Evil. Jeff noticed the fly as he exited the vehicle to head into the store to begin his shift. Its head was bright orange, like a miniature pumpkin. It was so ugly, Jeff tried to crush it, but it managed to fly away. Once inside, Jeff got busy stocking and shifting in the soup and pasta sauce aisle. He seldom interacted with the other people working the graveyard shift, but tonight he was so shaken he really wanted to keep to himself. He kept replaying the incident mentally, over and over and over again, and probably would have kept thinking about it all that night, till he saw another of the ugly flies perched atop a can of chicken with wild rice, and apparently watching him with cold intent. Jeff swung at it and missed, knocking a row of soup cans to the floor with an enormous racket. One of his colleagues, what's his name? Jeff didn't remember, stuck his head around the corner of the aisle. "Hey, Jeff, what you doing, eh?" "Oh, I just knocked some cans over." He really didn't want to talk. "Hey, you seen those weird flies?" "Huh? They're all over the produce, eh?" As if summoned, a host of the strange flies came sweeping down the aisle and completely enveloped both men, and Jeff learned something new. They could bite. Hard. They were in Jeff's hair, in his eyes and ears and nose, and even in his mouth. Instinctively, he began running for the exit, running to get away. Somewhere he could hear people screaming and swearing, but he was concentrating on just one thing: to get out, out, out. And then he was out. But the night outside was full of the devil insects too. Jeff ran blind, afraid to open his eyes, and he actually triggered his car alarm in order to locate his vehicle. The car too was full of flies, so Jeff turned the AC on full and used the vents to blow them away from his face so he could drive the few blocks to home. Home, where he stood with his clothes on in the shower to drown them and kill them. He stood there for over 20 minutes until the drain was clogged with dead insect bodies. Insect cadavers squelched out of his wet clothes as he stripped off. Jeff regarded himself in the mirror, never an impressive sight, and found his flabby body was covered with welts and burn marks. What the hell were those things? Jeff shambled into his living room, where he collapsed on the couch, still butt naked, and just slumped there, staring into space. Those flies, he thought. Did they follow me back from the cemetery? Are they connected to those head things, those heads? Damn it all! I should never have gone there. Jeff heard a faint buzzing, which made him look up. There, in the center of the beige wall, directly across from him, was perched one of the strange evil flies with its malignant orange head. And as Jeff watched, it was joined by another. And another. They seemed to materialize out of thin air. And another. 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 In the end, the pandemonium at the grocery store and the injuries to staff were blamed on a chemical leak. How else to explain those burns? Jeff was found naked and very dead in his apartment. There were no apparent injuries to his body, but when they opened him up, they found his corpse full of thousands of strange flies with ugly orange heads, a species totally unknown to science, unknown in this world. As for the night floaters, do they still meet in the cemetery after dark to prey on bugs and the unwary? Go and see, if you dare. The moral of the story: if you don't bother the dead, they won't bug you in return. If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring such cryptids as the Night Floaters, werewolves, and the Black-Eyed Children. So again, please consider subscribing. Please help me to reach my goal of 2,500 subs in 2022. Till midnight. Cheers. Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pix Here. That's PX Here. While the music was the classic Ghost Processional by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod.